Hey, we back. I'm here talking about Notbot again, the last video in this mini series where we're going over the characters. And so the last one's left is the attackers. We're going over attackers today, again, which one's best, which one's worse, whatever. And that's about it. So let's get on with it. Because we've got to keep decreasing the time, because the time on the other two kind of long. Anyway, we'll start with Ava. Ava is the common attacker, damage 200, health points 500, armor 20. You will notice immediately that the damage is considerably higher than the tanks and the healers. Of course, that makes sense, and it's an attacker, that's how it works. Ava also has reasonable health and armor, which is nice, but obviously not as much health as the tanks. So, the supers, that's what we all care about the most. We've got Tornado. This, paralyzes a character for the next turn as they can't attack, and this one has no armor during paralysis. Kind of an interesting one. Actually, you could argue similar to Volcano, which we'll get to later. But yeah, Tornado is kind of nice. You probably won't have too much issue going up against Ava's Tornado, because for the most part, they're going to use it on a character that has already attacked this turn, just by pure chance, and then it makes no difference. And it's also worth noting that while, yes, it paralyzes a character for the next turn so they can't attack, it also obviously uses up Ava's attack. So it's a one-for-one deal. The armor is almost the thing that you want to be going for with it, and of course that doesn't make too much difference except with Yuval, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, so yeah, it's a reasonable super. It's worth using, I think, but for the most part, wouldn't bother. Airblades is the better one. Ava's Airblades are pretty nice. Applies AoE damage to her normal attacks and lasts 2 turns. Now, when it says it lasts 2 turns, you have to remember that the first turn that it's lasting is the turn that you use the super on. So you actually only get 1 normal attack with the super, which makes it not that great. But on the other hand, when it says applies area effect, it doesn't split your damage for the 3 opponents. It just does your damage to all 3 opponents. So you use 1 attack to get the super, but then you get 2 extra attacks when you then normal attack. So you actually do 1 extra attack worth of damage, which is pretty nice. And of course, the fact that it's area of effect means it ignores things like attention. So Airblades is actually pretty good. If you do plan on using Ava, I would use Airblades every turn that you can. Obviously, it lasts 2 turns, so you can't use it literally every turn, but I would use it every other turn and normal attack the other turn, which is the main reason you probably won't be using Tornado, just because you want to use Airblades all the time. It's great. But it's not the best area of effect in my opinion, and we'll get to that later. So, next we have Izumi. Izumi is also pretty good. This is going to be a common theme among attackers. They're pretty good. So Izumi has a bit more damage and a bit more health than Ava, the same amount of armor though. So stat-wise slightly better, and the supers are actually kind of better as well. It depends what team you're up against actually, but let's get to them. So we've got Tsunami. All positive effects on all enemies are cancelled, plus 15% damage boost to all your normal attacks for the next turn. So this is similar to Mika's Gust, which we talked about last time, whereas Mika's Gust is all negative effects on allies. This is positive effects on enemies, which is normally better, actually. So Tsunami is better than Gust, and of course it has the 15% damage boost as well, which makes it even better than Gust. So yeah, Tsunami is pretty good. It again is particularly good for getting rid of golems, which we will get to later in the video. But it's pretty good all around anyway. If your opponent has a lot of positive effects up, just use a Tsunami and you get a little bit of a damage boost. That's kind of nice. It is a lot better than Mika's Gust. We also have Hailstorm, which is actually alright as well. Applies the effect critical. Your normal attacks have a 40% chance to deal 40% more damage. Lasts 2 turns. This affects all of your allies, not just the Izumi. So that's kind of nice, although you have to remember that the maximum amount of attacks you can get off this is 5, because of course it lasts 2 turns. With 3 people that would be 6, but -1 because you've got to actually use the Hailstorm first. So that's 5 attacks you can get 40% chance to deal 40% more damage on. I think if you use all 5 attacks, you might get a whole extra attack worth of it. Of course, it depends on your RNG. But to be fair, even then, you have used up Izumi's attack to get it, and Izumi's attack is likely to be more than your other allies' attacks. So it's not the best skill ever, but I think if you're running a team with a lot of attackers, 2 or maybe 3 attackers, Hailstorm could certainly be worth using. It's slightly RNG based, of course, but yeah, so Izumi, alright, for sure. We also have Fulvia. Fulvia next has some really high damage at 280. Health points are only 450, which is one of the lowest in the game. Not as low as Yara, but one of the lowest. And then we have armor 20. So, the supers, we have Flame. Flame is pretty much useless. All your normal attacks deal more damage to the flamed enemy, the less armor they have. Targets preferably tanks. So the increase from Flame really isn't worth that much, and Volcano is exclusively better. We're about to get to that, obviously. But, I mean, I guess it's okay. It's a reasonable skill. But yeah, there is never a reason to use Flame over Volcano, so for the most part, there's just no point going into it. Volcano is the better one because the armor of one enemy unit melts, minus 80% capacity for 2 turns, and targets preferably tanks. So this is particularly good up against tanks that have a lot of armor in the first place, like Aiden, and it's also good against Yuval with their skill to get more armor, which we've gone into before in the tanks video. The link for that will be in the description. But yeah, Volcano is pretty good. If you're going up against a team that has a lot of tanks, or that's bothering to use attention on their tanks, then I would suggest using Volcano. It can do a lot of extra damage, but for the most part, this is good for countering Yuval. Volcano, if you do the maths, actually is unlikely to gain you damage in the same sense that Hailstorm is, because you use up a Fulvia attack to use it, and then you can only potentially get 5 attacks from your other allies in the next 2 turns out of it. So you really do have to use all 5 if you want to profit from this. The same as Hailstorm. But in the case that you do, it's alright, and in the case that you're up against a Yuval, it's suddenly really good. So that's nice. Next we have Berlian. Berlian, in my opinion, probably the best attacker, actually. We have 260 damage, not quite as much as Fulvia, but it's certainly up there. 550 health points, which is actually pretty good, and 25 armor, the most armor that we've seen. So they already have probably the best stats out of all the attackers. But their supers are outstanding. We'll start with Earthquake, which is deal 50% of base damage to all enemies. Let's just talk about that for a second there. 50% of base damage to all enemies, that adds up to 150% damage. You are already doing more damage than normal. This is almost as good as Ava's skill with the AoE, but the difference is this doesn't take a turn to trigger with the normal attack. It doesn't use up your next turn. So instead of taking up 1 turn and then getting 3 times the amount of damage, you don't take up a turn and get 150% of the damage. Considerably better. But the other thing is, because it is not increasing the normal attack damage, it is just straight up a super that does damage. This actually ignores armor, so it's really good up against things like Yuval with a lot of armor and skills like that. It also ignores other skills like Aiden's defense skill and even Yuval's defense skill. And it also ignores skills like Charon's Headwind, so you're not going to be taking damage from that, just overall ignoring everything and doing 150% of damage. If you are using Berlian, I would advise to use Earthquake every turn you can. It does have a cooldown of 1 turn, so you can only use it once every 2 turns, but I would use it once every 2 turns. The only case that you wouldn't is if you have already killed off some of your opponent's characters, because of course in that case it's not dealing 150% damage, it's just dealing 100% or just 50%. Now to be fair, Earthquake is still worth using against 2 enemies, because it's still dealing 100% of your damage and it's ignoring the extra effects, which is still really good. But it's not as good as with 3. When you've only got 1 character left, there's no point using Earthquake. Just go for the attacks. But by that point, you've probably won anyway, so it's fine. Now, the second half of this effect is actually going to make it even better, as if Earthquake wasn't good enough already. Earth Fissure, which has a 10% chance to trigger, which means that the enemies take an additional 25%, which is now 75% of damage, which adds up, therefore, to a total of 225% damage. Now, this only has a 10% chance to trigger, so there's no point in relying on it. That's quite a low chance. But it is just straight up meaning Earthquake sometimes does more damage than 150%. Which is insane. So Earthquake, in my opinion, probably one of the best skills in the game. It's insane. So yeah, you should use that as much as possible. The other thing is we have Earth Golems, which is another great skill, because Earthquake's not good enough apparently. 3 Earth Golems appear and each deal 15% damage from burly and space damage to enemy characters. They are alive until the enemy kills them. So 15% damage doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. Even to all 3 enemies, that's only 45% damage. But they persist until the enemy kills them. That's going to take a few turns. For the most part, you use them once at the start of the game and they're still alive at the end. So by turn 2, you've done 90% damage. By turn 3, you've already done over 100% damage and you're profiting. Right? A match is going to last more than 3 turns most likely, especially if it's a losing one, which is when you need the help. So that makes Earth Golems a really good skill. Now, it's not as good as Earthquake, I don't think, because it does take quite a few turns to get your damage back, and sometimes it is worth actually using Earthquake first instead of Earth Golems. Obviously, Earth Golems are better the earlier in the match you use them, but I do sometimes use Earthquake and then Earth Golems. In fact, sometimes you want to attack with Burlian, you never know. What a weird idea that would be. But yeah, Earth Golems are certainly worth having. The other thing that's good about Earth Golems is that it says the enemy has to kill them. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% sure how the enemy kills them. It's done through normal attacks. You normal attack, and sometimes you might attack a golem instead. But the point is that when you attack a golem, it tanks the hit. You get 3 Earth Golems, right? So that's 3 hits that you can just tank for free without taking any damage from your opponent. That is a good reason to use Earth Golems. So yeah, the chances are you'll get more damage if you use it earlier on, and it's okay, but the fact that you're tanking 3 extra hits with the Earth Golems as well makes it even better. So Earth Golems is normally what I would use turn 1, and then Earthquake use every other turn, just alternate Earthquake and normal attacks. If you get too late into the game and you haven't used your Earth Golems, or they got removed from a gust or a tsunami, or maybe even they all got killed, probably don't bother using it again, because later in the game it's not worth using. But at the start of the game, absolutely, always use an Earth Golems, it's really good. So yeah, there you go. Burlian has some great skills. Also worth noting that Earth Golems only costs 30 battle points, which is pretty much free, although Earthquake costs 55, which is quite a lot. It is also worth mentioning with Burlian, of course, that both of these attacks are AoE, and so they both ignore attention as well. This makes them even better. You can get like someone down to really low health and then, oh no, your opponent attentioned, what will I do? Earthquake, and they're dead anyway. It's so good. But yeah, just, you know, in case Burlian wasn't good enough already, he also ignores attention. We now move on to Qiyana, the last attacker, who's also really good, but we'll get to that. So, damage 300, which is the highest that we've seen so far from an attacker. 620 health points, which is again the highest we've seen so far, and armor 20, which is not the highest, but it's pretty good. So you cannot complain about Qiyana's stats. The skills, though, are pretty good. So you have Meteors. A meteor hits all enemies for 40% of Qiyana's base damage. After hitting it, deals 5% of max health of the enemy's damage for 2 turns. So this is kind of similar to Burlian's Earthquake. It's only 40% rather than 50%. But it's doing that extra 5% of max health after that anyway, so you're pretty much going to get your 50% after a couple of turns. This costs a little bit less battle points as well, so this is arguably better than Earthquake even. It doesn't have the extra 10% to do 75% damage though. But yeah, Meteors is absolutely a great skill. It's about as good as Earthquake. It's kind of equivalent. So yeah, Qiyana already being about as good as Burlian. Precision Strike, kind of an interesting one though. Depending on your playstyle, you may want to use Precision Strike very often or not at all, which is I think what makes or breaks Qiyana. If you can get a strategy that uses Precision Strike a lot, for example if you're using a Resurrection like Yara or Elada, then your team could be really good, but you're then having to waste a slot on a healer, so anyway, let's talk about it. So Qiyana takes her powerful sniper rifle and hits an enemy for 275% of her base damage. Consider that her base damage is 300. That basically one-shots, right? Like, you're pretty much one-shotting anyone, unless you're going up against someone much higher level than you and it's a tank like Charon with a huge amount of health anyway. Like, you're pretty much just gonna one-shot them. Right. So it's really good. Has a 15% chance, however, to fail and hit her instead, which, as you can imagine, is gonna one-shot Qiyana instead, right? So it's a bit of a risk. Her rifle then needs 3 turns to reload, and in the beginning of the battle 2 turns before it can be used, so you can't use it too often. This 50% chance to fail is really the problem, because let's suppose you win every battle that it works in and you lose every battle that it doesn't work in. It means your streak is going to be really low, because yeah, okay, you have a high chance to win a battle, but after you've done 10 battles, the chance that you lose one, pretty high. You want to get a streak of more than 10. So you cannot rely on it working every time, because even though it's only got a 15% chance to fail, it will fail sometimes, right? And the other thing is it hits her instead, not as well as, right? So that means you're relying on it to kill someone, and it might not even kill them. It might just take out one of your characters. So this makes it actually really bad skill for building a streak. This is why I say it's good if you can use something like Yara or Elada, because you don't rely on it working. You hope that it works, but if it doesn't work, you can revive Qiyana and try again. Elada even seems a good choice at this point, because obviously you're trying to use the skill, right? You're not trying to keep Qiyana alive, so having Qiyana at 1 health is perfectly fine. They might kill themselves anyway. So I can see how you could do some strategy with that, but like I said, it relies on you taking a second attacker out of your team, which is normally not what you want to do. I would say Precision Strike is probably what you want to use if Qiyana is going to die soon anyway, because then whether they die or not doesn't matter so much. At least you might take someone with you, so that would be kind of nice. And of course, in the case where Qiyana is going to die anyway, that's a losing battle, and if you're in a losing battle, that's when you need the help anyway. So it could be kind of nice in that situation, and if I used Qiyana, I certainly would use Precision Strike sometimes, but you can't rely on it if you want to go for a streak. Not at all, it's just not going to work out for you. So yeah, that's why I think probably Burlian is better than Qiyana, because at least Burlian's skills are both reliable, whereas Qiyana pretty much just has meteors. But it depends on the team you make, and if you make a team around Qiyana, you can certainly use Precision Strike very often, and Qiyana has potential to be the best attacker for sure. Anyway, we've now done all the attackers. Once again, I will not be going through Shattered. I've explained this in the other 2 videos, so I won't do it again. But yeah, that's about it. So I will end this one here. Bye!